It's all very well and good talking about watches that do this, that, and the other, that have all the bells and whistles. But at some point, someone actually has to wear the things. And if they want to do so for any kind of duration, a little thing called ergonomics is going to have to get involved. It's no good if a watch is too heavy, too loose, the crown digs in, or the bracelet is too tight. A watch must be sized correctly for you. And scientists tell me that the perfect sized watch for the average human being is exactly 39mm. So here's 3 of them. So we can keep on making great watch videos, I'd really appreciate it if you subscribed to the channel. If you already are, it really does help. Thank you. It's always on romance that watch stories are traded, but with the TAG Heuer Carrera, the intrigue in its 1962 creation surprisingly comes from a more commercial point of view. We'd like to imagine then newly inaugurated Heuer CEO, Jack Heuer, gazing out at the beautiful vista of the Jura Mountains, the howl of racing V12s echoing in his mind when he created the Carrera. But that's just not true. The company he had inherited was one made famous by its association with motorsport, manufacturing dash-mounted stopwatches for racing cars since 1911. But times were changing and the landscape with it, and when Omega announced the wrist-worn Speedmaster chronograph in 1957, Jack Heuer knew it was time to act. Except that he had to wait, because Heuer wouldn't be under his control until 5 years later. By that time, Heuer wasn't the only manufacturer looking to bring a modern chronograph to market, and so he had to act quickly. There was no time, or budget, to invest in new tooling and ground-up designs, so Jack took his business to those who could. It's at this point that something very interesting comes to light. I don't know if you've ever noticed, but a lot of the chronographs of the late 50s, early 60s look very similar. Omega, Rolex, Breitling, a lot of the chronographs from this era look incredibly similar. You would naturally pass this off as following trends, but the truth is more unusual. All these watchmakers were using the same parts from the same companies. Being too expensive to manufacture parts internally, most watch companies would source their cases, dials, and movements from external suppliers, often from a catalogue of ready-made designs. These suppliers were limited, their selection even more so, and so what results is a collection of watches powered by the same movements that look almost identical. That is, until Omega released the Speedmaster. Part of a trio of watches, the Speedmaster was a power move by Omega to show that it could make everything itself and didn't rely on suppliers like everyone else did. Those liar lugs, they stood out as unique, a show of the company's prowess, as did the asymmetric case and exclusive movement developed with Le Mania. Poor Jack Heuer just could not compete. The best he could do was pick a selection of pre-made parts he liked best and choose a name that would grab the public's attention. The name he chose was Carrera, Spanish for race, and the name given to a cross-country Mexican sports car rally, the Carrera Panamericana. And would you know, it worked. The watch may have been a part spin special, but the name was so evocative, it just didn't matter. The end of World War II was generally considered to be a good thing. For IWC, it meant that it was now free to trade with the rest of the world once again, and for the British Royal Air Force, it meant it was free to equip its pilots with the most accurate watches in the world with which to navigate. And the RAF is no stranger to finding its way through difficult conditions. During the Blitzkrieg, air raids over Britain were executed by the Luftwaffe at night to give the big, slow German bombers protection from British fighters. But to the surprise of the Germans, RAF pilots began to down their planes anyway, picking them out in the darkness. Pilot John Cat's-Eyes Cunningham alone brought down 19 enemy aircraft at night, much to the confusion of the enemy. spies were sent to Britain to discover the secrets of the RAF pilot's night vision and were surprised to discover that the answer was the consumption of vitamin A. Carrots. A nationwide campaign had swept not just the RAF, but the general public as well, encouraging citizens to eat carrots to improve their eyesight, helping them see during blackouts. Newspapers ran stories on the success of RAF pilots in downing night raids, attributing the victory to the humble orange root vegetable. There was even a mascot, Dr. Carrot, leading the charge. The truth? The British had invented radar and they didn't want the Germans to know about it. Back then, however, GPS wasn't a thing and wouldn't be for another couple of decades. There was no Waze, Google Maps. They couldn't even make do with Apple Maps. All these pilots had was a clock, a sextant, and the celestial bodies to find their way. Over barren countryside or, worse, the ocean, a pilot's ability to plot a course could be the difference between life and death. It stands to reason then that the more accurate the watch, the more accurate the navigation, and for the RAF it was pretty important to be precise. This is where IWC came in. They already had the technology to make a watch shockproof, anti-magnetic, dustproof and easy to read, and that's exactly what the RAF needed. IWC was more than happy to oblige. The technology was concentrated into a smaller, more compact form factor, maintaining the iron dial and movement cover to keep the damaging electromagnetism produced by the aircraft at bay. The dial shrank to fit, but was as clear and easy to read as it had ever been thanks to the contrasting numbers and glowing paint. A sturdy case and thick strap kept the watch operating in even the toughest conditions. This watch was the Mark 11, and it would become one of IWC's most successful. The humble Oyster Perpetual from Rolex has long been overlooked against its more impressive cousins, but it's a device that contains three of the great inventions that gave the company its big break. When we hear the words Oyster Perpetual these days, they sort of blend into one, but each stands for a key moment in Rolex history that, without which, it would likely not exist today. The very creation of Rolex was a fated endeavour. No brand, no budget. Rolex didn't have anything that could make it stand out against the weight of entities like Omega and Longines. Where to begin? It was clear that there was no chance of going head-to-head, so the only other option was to take a big gamble and try something completely different. The first gamble was the wristwatch itself. Sounds crazy, but back then a wristwatch just wasn't the done thing. A wristwatch was a piece of jewellery, not a precision timekeeper. They were, to be frank, an embarrassment. Nevertheless, Rolex set up meetings with movement manufacturers, specifically ones who made movements for ladies' pocket watches so they were small enough to fit on the wrist, case makers and every other trade they needed, and asked them to build them a wristwatch. But not a piece of jewellery, a precision instrument. The second gamble was the way the wristwatch was put together. A pocket watch, and later, once other companies realised that wristwatches were becoming a thing, were elegant, beautiful objects, not industrial devices, and so the idea of water resistance simply didn't warrant the attention of the traditional companies. One wouldn't dream of taking one's exquisite watch into a damp environment. Not so for Rolex. Using technology seen on prototype pocket watches, the company commissioned its suppliers to build a case sealed with screw threads and gaskets, which it called the Oyster. The third gamble was how the wristwatch was powered. A man wound his wristwatch every morning as a matter of ritual, marking the start of a busy and productive day. Using a self-winding movement was to strip that interconnectivity between man and mechanism that defined the artistry and precision of a mechanical watch. Nevertheless, Rolex did it anyway. A few other brands had tried and failed with more complex mechanisms, but Rolex's 360-degree rotor, the Perpetual, was slick and simple. Each and every one of those gambles somehow paid off. So, what this watch represents isn't just the last reserve of a jeweler's window after everything else has sold out, but the foundation upon which Rolex became the giant that it is today. There would be no Submariner LVs, ceramic Daytonas, and black and blue GMT Master 2s without it. If you've been rummaging through catalogues looking for that perfect 39mm watch, and you've been dismayed to see chunker after chunker, fear not. The scientifically approved 39mm watch does still exist, and there are plenty enough for you to get your teeth into. Discover more exceptional watches at Watchfinder. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please do consider giving it a like and subscribing to the channel. If there are any watches you'd like to see featured, please let us know in the comments below.